Hey, everybody, and welcome to your Renewed Training Podcast. Hopefully, you have been enjoying training so far. Our goal is that these podcasts, this training, that it's helpful for you in your personal ministry, but also more than that it's helpful for you in your personal life. So today, we're going to give you a little insight into how you structure that first session, and then also, what do you do with the history-taking part of the Renew workbook. So my name is Matt Driggers, and I'm going to be your host during these sessions. But to start off with, I have with us to help work through this, Amy Todd. Now, Amy, you are the Renew Director at Buckhead Church, but also you are in charge of Renew, sort of multi-campus. So if it happens in Renew, you are a part of it. Did I get that right, or did I give you a promotion?
No, you did. That's right. I love Renew, and I'm excited for all of our new mentors in training right now.
Awesome. Well, when you discussed, you and I were talking offline a little bit about what we want during the first session. That very first time you meet with a care receiver, they haven't even necessarily seen the workbook yet. And you mentioned that one of the goals was to create a safe environment. So talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely, Matt. Well, mentoring is very relational. You're going to have a relationship with your care receiver, and creating a safe, confidential environment for them to share is going to be really important. You want them to be able to trust you. You want them to understand that you accept them. And we want that trust and acceptance to begin to build right from the very first session. You are a safe, objective person. And many people don't have somebody like you in their lives that will genuinely listen to them and help them navigate through the challenges of life. So this first session is really important to help set that foundation.
So with that first session, we want to create it safe. What do we need to do? Give us some things that we can do prior to that first session to set us up for success.
Well, when you're paired, you're going to receive your care receiver's application and a workbook. And before you ever even look at the application, the first thing that I would encourage you to do is pray and ask God for wisdom. Ask God to help you see your care receiver like He sees them, because you're going to look at it through your own lens and through your own biases. So I would encourage you to pray and ask God for the courage to speak truth in love, and the courage to be able to share the Renew materials with them.
Yeah, and that's not just lip service. That's not just a church answer. That is, we believe something does happen, that God will start opening your eyes when you take that time to pause and invite Him into this process.
Right. He is a part of the matching process. He knows that you're the right mentor for them, and He's already preparing the way for what He's going to do in their life and in their heart. So prayer is a great place to start.
So you pray, and you're sitting there now in prayer with this multi-page application, which all of the trainees have had a chance to fill out, or if they haven't, they will in the next few weeks. It's a pretty in-depth application. So what do we do with it?
Well, you're going to want to read it a number of times. I would suggest reading it with a highlighter in your hand. You want to review the application before the first meeting, not just an hour before, but the week before, and be aware and highlight any early influences you see, any themes of unhealthy behaviors or emotions, things like manipulation or people-pleasing, perfectionism, etc. There's going to be predictable patterns and themes and certain coping mechanisms that they use that are going to be evident as you read through the paperwork. And you're going to want to highlight those and start to identify what are the ways that they cope with negative or damaging behaviors and emotions, because those are the things we're going to address and Renew.
I love that point. It's not something you want to review on your way to the meeting for the first time. There really is something to marinating in this application. But you said something I want to make sure that all of our listeners get that was really important. So what is it when they're reviewing the application? You said they are looking for influences?
Yes, early influences. Unhealthy behaviors and emotions, and predictable patterns or coping strategies. For a couple of examples, maybe you see in reading through their paperwork a pattern of withdrawing or pulling away from difficult situations or difficult people. That's a coping strategy that they use. Or maybe you see that they constantly strive for approval or acceptance. Maybe they're constantly striving to be in control all the time. These are relational patterns, and those are going to start to emerge as you're reading through the paperwork.
So those influences, unhealthy behaviors, emotions, predictable patterns, and you're actually going to have a chance to do this with some of your fellow training applications. For those of you who are listening, going through the training, you're going to get a chance to do this and practice it in person. Now, Amy, let me go a little more practical. So you've prepared, you've got the application in hand. you now show up to the meeting. What in general can you expect out of the flow for this first meeting with your care receiver?
Well, you as the mentor can set the stage. Chances are the care receiver is going to be nervous about meeting you. So I would suggest that you go in with confidence. That's one thing that I wanted to stress right from the beginning is when you take on a care receiver, you need to be 100% in. The care receivers entrusted us with all this very personal information, and after a lot of consideration and thought and prayer, they have been matched with you, and you have accepted this assignment. So you need to go into that first session with confidence that you are their mentor. They're not going to have that confidence yet. And this is not a let's try it and see how we get along kind of thing. It's more about them learning to trust you, and you need to show your excitement about meeting with them. So don't go in wishy-washy, but then you'll share a little about yourself to lead the conversation because you're going to be the facilitator, you're going to be guiding the conversation. And then what you'll do is ask them to share the obstacles or challenges that have brought them to mentoring. That's usually, it's one of the first couple of questions on the application. You can even start there by asking them, so tell me a little bit about the challenges that caused you to seek a renewed mentor at this time. This will usually take the bulk of the first session. It's really just getting to know each other. You're going to remember your active listening skills that you learned the first week, how to listen and reflect back what you're hearing, and also keep in mind that 80-20 rule. If you're talking more than 20% of the time, that's probably not the best balance. You want them to be sharing their challenges and obstacles or the reasons why they've come to mentoring, and that should take up the bulk of the first session.
Yeah, those active listening skills we talked about in our first training session are really going to weave through all of the sessions you will do. Let me back you up. I think you really surfaced the tension here about sharing stuff with yourself, because we do what we'd like to refer to as a precision matching. In other words, we look for something that is going on in a care receiver's life that one of our mentors has experienced in some form or on some level. So I want to invite you into that tension that we feel. How much do you share as a mentor of your own life? What's a good rule of thumb we can go by?
Sure, that's a balance, and you'll get better at it over time, but you're going to want to share enough of your story to help them understand that you can relate to them, that you understand where they're coming from. Things like if they share something about their mom, my mom always pressured me, I felt pressured by her to be perfect all the time. You can chime in and say, you know what, I understand what you feel like. My mom pressured me a lot too as a teenager. Something that makes them understand that you know where they're coming from. It's a balance, and you're not always going to get it right. But again, if you keep that 80-20 rule in mind, and just remember that self-disclosure is not always appropriate. If it's not going to help you connect to their story, then it's probably not the best time or the best information to share. And you don't want to be making the session all about you and your story and your stuff. You want to be making it about them.
That's so good. That's worth repeating, that you're going to share if it's going to help the care receiver, not just for the sake of talking, but share your own story to the end that it helps the other person. That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that with us. What about else? Some other guidelines, guardrails for that first meeting?
Well, it's going to be really easy for you and probably pretty natural for you to form your own theories or conclusions about why they behave or respond the way they do. Well, that's because his mama raised him so-and-so. So you're going to I want to caution you not to do that. You don't have a psychology degree. You're not a counselor. Maybe some of you are, but probably most of you are not. I would encourage you to take good notes. It's okay to take notes. Taking notes isn't rude. You can let them know up front that you want to capture everything to the best of your ability that we've discussed in our meetings, and so you're going to be taking some notes, but that what they share and what you write down is all kept in confidence. So you're going to want to hold back from forming any of those conclusions and coming up with any theories yourself.
That is so easy. If you left it up to me in conclusions, I think the mentoring process could take about 20 minutes because I got you figured out.
You want to listen well, take good notes, and really get to hear their story the bulk of that first session.
Now, in the session, too, there's something you like to end your session with your first care receiver, sharing some goals and goal setting, which I thought was really interesting. So what do you give us a little bit? You are asking here the care receiver to set some goals. What does that look like? Sure.
I like to keep my sessions to right about an hour, and so you want to keep an eye on the clock. You don't want these sessions to go 2 hours, 3 hours. You really want to respect their time and set up a a consistent meeting schedule where you're going to be meeting about an hour. So I would reserve about that last 15 minutes or so just to do some housekeeping. You're going to want to give them a brief overview of the mentoring process. They need to know that the mentoring has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that you guys won't be meeting forever, but you'll be meeting approximately 4 to 9 months as you work through the curriculum. Sort of in the housekeeping part, the last 10 or 15 minutes of the session, you're going to want to set goals, like you mentioned, and boundaries for the mentoring. I like to set goals with the care receiver because it helps keep us on track. When I have their folder with their paperwork in it, this is a personal habit of mine, I just jot their goals down on the inside of the folder so that we can revisit them throughout the mentoring. But you want to help the care receiver set their goals because it sets the direction right from the meeting.
By goals, you're not meaning, hey, let's figure out how much you're going to save or what your vacation's going to look like this year, right? What sort of goals are people setting?
Yeah, you want to make sure that the goals are for themselves. They're more relational goals. A few questions that you can ask them to help them come up with their goals. What would you like to see happen as a result of mentoring? How would your relationships look different if mentoring were what you would term successful? These are, for example, goals. Maybe your care receiver would like to be less reactionary or more calm when responding to her husband when he gets angry. Maybe she wants to be more patient with her children. These are relational and behavioral and emotional goals, not saving goals, or I want to take a vacation in 6 months, or those kind of goals. And you're going to want to make sure that they set goals for themselves and their own relational patterns and behaviors, not somebody else.
So even though that's a structured curriculum, you're really buying in ownership by letting them determine the outcome of this mentoring.
And what I like to do, I mentioned revisiting the goals periodically throughout the mentoring. I was with my care receiver the other day, and she was telling me about a conflict she had with a coworker. And as I was hearing her describe how she reacted to that conflict, I looked back at these goals that she had set, and it's been about 4 months, and I remarked to her, wow, I don't think the young woman from 4 months ago would have responded the way you responded today. I think you're making progress. And so they live with themselves every day, so they don't see these little incremental changes, and you can be such a source of encouragement by helping them see that they are changing through this process and the way they respond and react to different things.
Yeah, very encouraging, very encouraging. Now, we've talked a little bit about the goal setting, but you threw out a really important word in there that we cannot just go over, and that is boundaries. That's setting up some boundaries as well during this first meeting. What sort of boundaries are common that you need to set as you start meeting with a care receiver?
Sure. Boundaries are, I have learned in doing this a long, long time, very, very important. A lot of people don't have healthy boundaries in their relationships. So actually, by setting boundaries with your care receiver, you can model what that looks like for them so that they can begin to set healthy boundaries in other relationships that they have. These are practical things like, I'm not going to respond to text messages 24 hours a day. And if you email me a question, I'm probably, if it's not an emergency, going to tell you, hey, that's a great question. Let's save that for when we meet next Tuesday at 7. You're going to want to keep your communication pretty much in the context of your meetings, and you can set those boundaries right up front. You're not going to want to babysit their kids or go to the mall and have lunch with them. You're not going to want to be their friend. You're wearing your mentor hat during this relationship, not your friend hat. So you don't want any confusion about your role in their life during this time. This can be boundaries about how often you're going to respond to text messages, or I'm only going to respond between the hours of 7 and 9 in the evening, kind of whatever it is that works best for you. But you're not on call 24/7 for this person, and to the best of your ability, establishing those things at the beginning of the relationship can keep you out of trouble.
Yeah, and that's that we don't take it for granted that setting boundaries is easy, even for mentors. That's something that many of us struggle with at different times and for varying reasons. So if you haven't had a chance to read any of Cloud and Townsend's work on boundaries, that is a great place to start. So boundaries, healthy for you, healthy for your care receiver. So here we are, and you've learned about why they're here, what they want. You've set some goals, set some boundaries. One of the next things we want to do is give your care receiver an overview of the process. What can they expect? For many of them, it may have been a week or so before they've had an intake or met with a staff member. So in your own words, how do you walk your care receiver through, here's what you can expect, here's what it's going to look like, how long are we going to work together?
Sure. I don't think it needs to take a very long time. You don't want to bog them down with a lot of details about the curriculum. You're going to get to each section and dive deep in each section of the material. So usually what I do is I have them turn to the table of contents in their workbook, and I just give them a brief sentence or two about what we're going to be covering in each section. So in the first couple of sessions, we're going to be identifying defeating patterns of thinking or behaving that have caused them to be stuck in life. I've met with hundreds and hundreds of people that have gone through this program, and that's really the one word that I find that best describes most all of them is the word stuck. They feel like, surely God's got a better way for me to live than this. I don't feel like I can get there. I feel like there's some obstacles in my way, and they just feel stuck. And so we're going to be in the early sessions identifying those defeating patterns of thinking that cause them to be stuck. Then we're going to discover what they believe about themselves and about God and how their needs should be met. These beliefs were developed really early in their life, and we're going to want to identify the influences that created these beliefs. Once we identify the false beliefs, the faulty ways of thinking that they have, we're going to counter them with truth in God's Word. That is one of my favorite parts of Renew. Actually, all of them are my favorite parts, but especially the truth part, because they begin to understand the truth of who God really says that they are. And as they begin to learn the process of renewing their mind, they're going to experience new behaviors and emotions, things like peace and joy and patience and self-control, things that they really want in life that lead to freedom in Christ. After we do the truth part and we learn how to renew our mind to the truth, you're going to discuss different concepts with your mentors. You're going to discuss the difference between brokenness and suffering. What does it mean to be broken? What does it mean to suffer? Everybody suffers, but not everybody gets to brokenness. So you want to give them a little bit of an idea that we're going to be talking about that. You're going to be helping them understand the purpose of difficulties and challenging circumstances and how to respond to those like Christ. We're going to discuss forgiveness. Sometimes that takes several weeks to go over, especially if they've got some work to do there. And you're going to want to tell them, hey, we're at the very beginning, we're going to be talking about forgiveness and get them thinking about maybe people or that they need to forgive or maybe even forgiving themselves. And then you want to tell them about the last part. The last part is a really equipping piece. You want to be able to equip them to walk in their daily life when you two aren't meeting anymore. This is designed to be a short-term partnership. It doesn't mean that y'all won't become friends down the road, but for this 4 to 9 months, you're their mentor, not their friend. So there will be an end to the sessions, and you're going to want to equip them and help them be confident that they can practice what they've learned in real-life, everyday situations. So towards the end, there's more equipping. There's some tools that you're going to walk them through. So you want to take a few minutes and just go over the process from beginning to end to help them begin to be comfortable with what y'all are going to be doing.
That is it. Yes, and Renew is, as I think as you're alluding to there, it's a disciple-making tool. That is what we're about. That's what we're doing, and this is one way of doing it. Amy, I'm not going to let you out of here without answering one of the most asked questions that we get as a staff member, and that is about the physical environment. Where do you meet with your care receiver?
Well, the great news is that Renew is really flexible, and it's not at a certain day of the week and time of day and location, and it's really just up to you and the care receiver to set that up. You can meet at a different day of the week and time each week. You can meet on a Tuesday morning at a coffee shop one week. You can meet on a Sunday afternoon at a room at the church the following week.
What about my house?
Yeah, I would recommend that you keep it to a neutral location, not your house, not her house, not his house. But that sort of sets apart the mentoring sessions and makes them feel special and purposeful, and it's not just me coming out to hang out at your house or you coming to my house. So I would recommend that it's a quiet, public location. Examples are a Chick-fil-A, a quieter Starbucks. There are some rules at each campus about reserving rooms. Some have more availability than others. So I would recommend that you check with your local campus staff about what's available and what's not. I've heard of care receivers meeting and reserving a room at the public library, or meeting in a park, or a conference room at someone's office. So there are, you can get really creative with it, and there are a lot of different options, but you just want to make sure it's a place where the care receiver feels safe and feels comfortable sharing. If it's a really busy Starbucks at a busy time of day, that's probably not a good idea, but you just want to make sure it's a safe place.
I love it. And around here, we are never afraid to plug Starbucks for anything. So free plug there. You're welcome, Starbucks. Now, the end of the first session has come. You're going to send your mentor home, your care receiver home with some homework. And it's a pretty intense homework. We're going to ask them to go through the history section of the workbook. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it'd be a great time to look at it in the next few days, because the questions, there are many of them, and they are pretty in-depth. And most of them can, or at least some of them, elicit some sort of emotional response. So what do? You got coming back with your care receiver. Give us some guidelines now. And this is usually the second meeting with your care receiver. Give us some of those guidelines of what do you look for? How do you know which questions are important?
Sure thing. The history taking is quite extensive. It's an extensive survey of their past. They're going to be answering questions like, what I wanted from my mom and did not get was blank, or my dad gave me a view of God as blank. So it's not check the boxes kind of questions. It's really thought-provoking. So as you assign that for homework after the first session, you want to encourage them not to do that an hour before the next meeting. You want to encourage them to maybe do that a little bit along throughout the week so that they can spend some time thinking about their answers. The main thing I want to point out is you don't have to go through the history taking all in one meeting. So you've returned, they have their workbook, they filled it out. Sometimes going through the history taking can take several meetings. On average, it takes me 2 meetings, sometimes 3, to be able to get through the history taking and talk about the questions. This is some really rich discussion because you're going to be asking them about their answers. And I would recommend just stepping through each question by question and asking them about their answers and discussing it. And maybe you notice a theme or a pattern or a thread you want to pull, and so you ask some additional questions like, that sounds really hard. Tell me more about that. Or what was that experience like for you? And keep digging away as you're taking notes on your own paper as well. So don't feel pressure to get through all of the questions, but I would give yourself plenty of time and just step through them one by one. And there are going to be sometimes questions that they're going to leave blank, or they're going to say, I don't know. If they say, I don't know on 30 out of the 60 questions, you're going to want to say, I sometimes tell my care receiver, I don't know is, I think you do know. So even if you don't want to write it down, maybe we can talk about it. Yeah.
Now that those questions going through, I often tell people I'm not so much interested in what you say, but what sort of emotion came up as you were writing that. That's one way to press into this. Now, it is tempting sometimes, because that is a lot of writing. We're in a culture that doesn't do a lot of writing, to let's just talk about the questions. Now, I often love people, if you're going to work with me, I want you to write. There's something about reflecting and taking the time to pause, connecting that pen to paper. Is that a valid? We want people to write in these workbooks or write the answers to these questions?
Yes, they're going to be this is their workbook to keep, and so you want to, for them to get as much out of the experience as possible. So I definitely would encourage them to write their answers. And even as we're talking in the session, if they mention something else, or if they come up with a new memory or something that they would like to share, have them jot it in the workbook. It's their workbook to keep, so they can write as much or as little as they'd like. I think it's important, in case you get the question, why are we doing this? I don't understand why we're talking about my mama and my daddy and what happened in the past when I was 10. You can explain to them that, yes, it is true that you can't go back and change your past. You can't go back and change that your dad was an alcoholic or that your mom was moody all the time. That's true. But you can understand how those influences shaped your thinking, and that you can come up with it. You can have a different interpretation of the events and the people and the circumstances from your past that can lead you to a healthier place. So sometimes to go forward, you have to go back, and you have to look back to understand where you came from.
That feels like a beautiful place to end. Amy, thanks so much. So we have covered in this podcast that very first meeting, the way to structure it, how to set it up, and we've also covered your second meeting in which you're taking the history side of your care receiver. Guys, I hope that's helpful. When you get back together with your training groups, you're going to have a chance to ask questions, to dig a little deeper into some of this content, but hopefully this is Prime the Pump. And again, we want Renew to be helpful to you in your personal ministry and in your personal life. So thanks for what you do. Thanks for being here. We'll see you soon.